Blessings, everyone. Welcome to my channel, Crossroads Meets the Ocean Rose. Thank you so much for being here. So I want to welcome you in to our first podcast, the Walk with Faith podcast. We're going to be having different individuals join us on these podcasts. They're going to be sharing their journey in life, their trials and tribulations, their experiences, and many different walks of life, really, that are going to be joining us. If you would like to be a part of this podcast, please let me know your spiritual journey, your walk with the Most High. If you're a walking testimony, or just everything you've been through and you want to share with people, you want to share your story. This is about empowering, inspiring others. So please let me know, and thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to having more incredible guests on this beautiful blessing, this podcast. Thank you so much. Many blessings, everyone, and sending you so much love. Blessings, everyone. Welcome to my channel, Crossroads Meets the Ocean Rose. I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for joining us. This is our first and ever podcast, Walk with Faith podcast, and today we have a wonderful guest. This is Ronald Townsen. So Ronald Townsen, can you say hi to everyone?
Hello, everyone.
So
glad you're joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really, I'm grateful that you've decided to be a part of this and share your journey, different trials and tribulations and where you're at now to help inspire others and share your story with other individuals. So thank you.
Glad to be here.
So a little bit about Ron is he is an author of a series called Watcher in the Fall. This is a science fiction spy series. It also has some adjacent books, Tales from Our Universe's Edge, some historical fiction trilogies, The Templar and End Times, Da Vinci Connections, Templar Freemasons, right?
Yes.
The Circle Completes. And then you have one, The Knights Templar, The Spear of Destiny. You've also, you have a series of wonderful cookbooks as well, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So how did you decide to start writing and become an author?
So actually, it was my daughter. I was traveling, and back in mid 2008, 2010, roughly, I was traveling literally bi-coastal every week. I'd fly out on a Sunday, I'd come back on a Saturday, and I'd turn around and fly back out on a Sunday, as I was traveling between San Diego and Washington, D.C. area. I was living in a hotel, obviously, for that week that I'm out there. And I happened to go down, I had a meeting, I had to go down into Virginia area, and it was in the fall, and the trees were turning, and a pretty spectacular road pathway that I was driving through, as the trees were all, fiery and with their changing of the colors of the season and so forth. And after my meeting, I went back to the hotel that night, and I wrote an email to my daughter. She at that time was debating whether to go into writing or into art, graphics art type stuff. And so, kind of almost as a joke, I wrote a little paragraph that was very flowery and talking about the trees, burning trees and the light, just the colors and the beauty of what I'd seen and stuff. And I sent it to her. And she responded back with an email that said, Dad, I know you've never had a hobby, but maybe you ought to take up writing. And so I thought about that. I thought, yeah, that would be something different for me. I've never done that. I would, obviously at that time this is just part of my engineering phase, senior engineer. And so I decided to write a science fiction book. And I thought about the theme. It took me quite a while to come up with an idea. I watched a lot of science channels and so forth. And I finally came up with an idea. And so I wrote a first draft of a book, sent it off to my daughter. Actually, I have two daughters, and I sent it off to both. They came back, and they just bled all over the writing. It was horrible because it was written as an engineer. It wasn't written as a science fiction author type book. So it took me 20 drafts, roughly, before I finally got something that they said was acceptable. And so that was the beginning of my writing career.
Okay.
It was a challenge. It took a different frame of mind to write science fiction than what I was living engineering science at that point in time, which I still do. But I realized it takes a change in mind. It takes a change in approach of how you do things to be able to write fiction books.
What I see here that's very interesting, you just said that it takes a different frame of mind, or to change it, right? It's really, when I hear that, it's about being open-minded to many different possibilities of what could be. So what's very interesting is you have your books, your nonfiction, historical fiction. I'm sorry. Right, and your sci-fi, but you're talking about another part of your life here, which is so interesting. Can you tell us more about your what do you do here? Please explain more, because it's very interesting, and I want you to share it.
Right. So in the early 70s, as I was graduating from college, even before I went to the university, I was at a junior college, and my brother-in-law was an engineer. My other brother-in-law was a physicist, material physicist, and I was, of course, just trying to figure out what I was going to do and so forth. So I was taking the same courses. I was taking engineering courses, chemistry courses, and stuff. Well, engineers take the same courses physicists do at the beginning. There's a set of 3 courses they have to take. So I was involved in taking those courses at the junior college. And then during the 3rd course, it just kind of clicked in my mind that I would rather be a mediocre scientist than be a good engineer, because I just enjoyed the science more than the engineering approach, which turns out to be somewhat odd, but given my career, but it's done me well in the fact that I was, from that point on, through the rest of college, I was taking physics courses, and I wasn't taking the engineering courses. But physics taught me a number of things which I've used throughout my life that I never would have had if I had just gone into engineering courses. It taught me about energy, and it taught me about how to look at things differently and get different aspects on a problem. And it also taught me you don't learn everything in the books, but what you do need to learn, as one professor told me, is how to read what's in the books and how to understand what's in the books, because you'll never know everything, and if you just study the books, it will only give you one perspective.
Right.
But if you understand how to read books and how to interpret what they're telling you, then you can get lots of perspectives. You can get lots of more information. and it frees your mind to really blend and put those things together. What I've realized over my life is I'm a person that knows how to connect patterns. So when I am looking at things, I'm not looking at them as what they are, but I'm looking at them as how they fit into a pattern and a structure. And that has provided me significant benefit over my career, which has been over 50 years, working in science and engineering.
And so sorry to interrupt you. Keep going, Ron.
So after college, I was working for the Navy, and I traveled. Basically, I started running computer systems for the Navy as we went on board ships, and we traveled the world collecting information about underwater acoustics and so forth. I tell everyone that we were doing. If you've heard of the book Hunt for Red October, seen the movie Hunt for Red October, that's what we were doing. We were hunting for Red October, and we were building all the science and the engineering necessary for the Navy to be able to do that at that time. And so throughout the 70s, I was working on underwater acoustics. I was working on a number of different areas for the Navy, and traveled the world and literally went around the world on expeditions for the Navy.
I have a quick question for you. When you were studying the underwater acoustics, did you notice or find anything that the viewers might be interested in hearing something different or anything that you were not expecting? Or what did you learn from that? Anything that stood out to you?
Well, it taught me it taught me a lot about applying types of things that I had learned in college, the mathematics, the engineering work that they were doing, but I was able to understand it very easily because of the physics training, because I was able to apply the physics that I had learned to the aspects of what they were doing. I was lucky enough, I was working with one of the world's leading scientists in underwater acoustics at the time, and he taught me a lot. Let me just put it that way. There was one particular interesting tale. He called me up. We were getting ready to start working on a new problem and going to the Indian Ocean. And so he had, of course, at that time we had blackboards in our offices. He had walls of blackboards just covered with the equations. And he called me up and he walked me through what he was working on and how he needed information to plug into the equations he was working on. And so it was my job to gather that information from the sensor systems that we were working with. And, he spent a half an hour, 45 minutes walking through all of the equations. And I thought I had it all figured out. I was taking my notes and I understood it. It was very complex, but I understood what he was doing. Walked out of the office. Must have taken about 15 steps down the hallway, and I questioned myself about one little thing. That question turned into a snowball question. And all of a sudden I realized I had no clue what he had been telling me properly. And I had to spend about a month working through it myself to get back to the point where I understood what exactly he was trying to tell me and what exactly he needed to be done to gather the information for what he was doing. It was a really telling time in my life because, I thought it was pretty smart, but it showed me a couple of things. One is there's always someone smarter than you. There always is someone smarter than you. And you really have to do the work. You can't just expect people to tell you the answer. Right. You have to do the work to understand really what you're trying to do. So it was a good lesson. It good lesson. But yeah, so again, I mean, our job was to go out and do research work, hunting for submarines, and we had some very interesting times. We were out in the North Pacific, and we had these long or underwater acoustic arrays. They were miles long, and the Navy was trying to figure out how to make them work, how to make use of them. Same thing with the oil industry was doing, but the Navy was applying it differently. So one of the things we wanted to do was try and keep that underwater line straight. Keep a miles of this acoustic set of receivers straight in a line. And so we were trying different ways. We had buoys at one end, parachutes, and all this other stuff. But we only had so many buoys and not so many parachutes. Well, the first few times we tried it, the buoy, we'd blow off the buoy, and we'd circle back around and be picking up the array, and we'd circle back to where the buoy should have been. It wasn't there. We lost it. We lost the parachute. We lost it. Wow. We did that a couple of times. We were down to our last buoy and parachute, and we decided, okay, before we do this again, we got to save that buoy, because that was our last one. So we drew straws. I lost along with one other guy. We got in a little Zodiac off the ship. We're now 400 miles north of Hawaii, right in dead center of the Pacific Ocean. Nothing around. So we take the Zodiac. We go out about a mile and a half to the end of where the buoy was at the end of the array, and we could only see the ship when we were both at the top of the swell. Other than that, we were down so low we couldn't see the ship, and the ship obviously couldn't see us very well. So we were on our radios, and I had a knife. I had pulled out a knife to cut off the rope to save the buoy if it started to sink. And we got the word that they were about to blow the array or blow the parachute. So they blew the parachute, and we're sitting there, and I got hold of that rope ready to cut it so that the buoy wouldn't sink. And all I could think about was I slipped and I hit that Zodiac, which is a rubber boat, with that knife. We're 400 miles. There's two of us, 400 miles, and we won't be found. Mm-hmm. And it was a little scary, but it was kind of exciting at the same time. Turned out we were okay. We didn't sink. They were able to come back around after about 2 hours and pick us up. And but that was a real experience in my life. It was one of many, let me put it that way, many experiences. So again, we were doing that type of work. We were out in the oceans. The ship, we weren't on a large ship. We were using what they called mud boats, which were really made for hauling mud out of Mississippi Delta down out to the oil rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico. They were round-bodied, so they rocked a lot. They were only about 180 feet long, so they weren't big. Weren't a big naval ship. But we would go out months at a time to do our work with these things, and we did it Pacific, Atlantic, Indian Ocean, Mediterranean. I mean, literally covered the world with research work. So it was a very interesting time in my life.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Moving forward,
so
I've done many other things.
So I'm noticing that it says here that you are very interested and studied cosmology, right?
Right. So as a physicist, in my physics training, physics students tend to get really excited about things that are physics related. That's the way of putting it. I had one professor who was studying neutron stars. That was his research work. The understanding of how atoms work, how quantum mechanics works, how energy is transformed between various states, how all of these particle fields relate to each other and connect to each other to build from the quantum level, subquantum level, all the way up to stars and galaxies, and how all of that comes together within the universe, which is what cosmology is all about, has fascinated me ever since I was a physics student. And part of it is my fascination with patterns, how these patterns evolved from the subatomic levels all the way up and join to form, things that are in our everyday lives, but extend on up into, the planets and the suns and the stars and the galaxies and so forth that make up our universe. It's a continuous flow pattern, if you would, and it's fascinated me for my lifetime. It's heavily involved in my work, and in my writings, and it dare I say, it ties to my faith. It really does. People say scientists don't believe in God. That's not true. Scientists are trying to understand what God has created. And we will only scratch the surface of what he's created, but we learn more and more and more about how things work and what he has been able to create for us. And it's just a fascinating subject. It's a never-ending subject of study and fascination, and has filled my life.
That's actually really wonderful. I just want to say what you just said. You're actually really searching and inspired to learn more about what the Most High, what God has created. So it's not believing, it's wanting to understand, wanting to know more, wanting the knowledge, wanting to know, but understanding his power.
Yes. It's the one phrase which has always kind of followed me throughout my career and throughout my life has been that one phrase that Albert Einstein once said, that God does not play dice. It was uttered by Albert Einstein when they were working on quantum theory, because quantum theory deals with probabilities and chances of certain things happening.
Right.
And Albert Einstein made that one statement: God does not play dice. Which meant, yes, as we see it, maybe at some point, as we're looking into these things, we see things which look like they're random events. There's random connections between particles and how they react and what they do and so forth. And the best we can do is measure probabilities of how a particle might move and so forth. And whether it's a wave or whether it's a particle, and what there's a scientific thing which is the foundation of quantum mechanics about particle-wave duality, both existing at the same time.
Right.
But what Einstein was really saying, and we're still searching for the right answers on how to make it work. But what he was really saying was, those things that happen, even at those most minute phases of what we can understand at this moment in time, while they look random, while they look like certain things are happening simply out of chance, the reality is it's not really happening out of chance.
No, of course not.
Not allowed it to happen out of chance.
Right.
He has a plan, and these things are happening. It's just we can't see the plan. We don't understand the plan enough to know that it's not random.
Right.
So that's that's been a foundation of my philosophy, if you would, for for the length of my time since I first ran into that information. And it's a philosophy of everything I do nowadays. Things do not happen by chance.
Yeah, there's no coincidences. Everything is in divine timing, a divine plan,
Yes.
divinely orchestrated. Every single thing that happens in our life is planned. You're right. God makes no mistakes. There are no accidents. And I love that by Albert Einstein. He does not play dice. No.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
So this is interesting. So your cosmology. Doing work associated with the black holes, dark matter, and dark energy, and the patterns of the multiverse. Please expand. Please, please, please.
so there are things about our universe which we just fundamentally don't understand. Everybody thinks, oh, we know everything we need to know. No, we do not. We do know, for example, if you measure galaxies and how they hold planets and stars and all the matter within a galaxy together as they rotate within the universe, if you do it by the laws of mathematics of gravity that Albert Einstein was able to fundamentally put forward, the galaxy would not hold together. There's just not enough gravity to hold the galaxy together. And so from that, people have begun to theorize things like dark energy, dark matter, and to give you an understanding, if you just account for the matter in a galaxy and you try and deal with the gravity of that matter trying to hold things together, you come up way short. The indications are that
interesting. You just said that.
the interesting part of it is, which is what we've kind of, the scientific community has come to an agreement, somewhat of an agreement on, never in full agreement, but somewhat of an agreement on, is we only see about 15 to 20% of the matter or gravity generating capability within our universe. The other 85%, we just don't know anything about. It takes that other 85% to hold everything together properly as we see it. And so that's where the term dark matter comes from. Because dark matter is the matter which we can't see. We just don't understand. We can't measure it. We can't measure its interaction with what we do. But we see its effect. We see its effect as it holds galaxies together.
I have a question, real quickly, regarding what you cannot see, how there's not enough gravity, the dark matter associated with God's creation, and He's got a plan for everything. So this is interesting. How would you put the two of those together?
Well, again, God doesn't reveal His secrets.
Right?
He expects us to do the work to figure it out.
I love that. You're right.
And there are many, and this is, some people tell kids, don't go into science, they know everything, they've already figured it all out. There's nothing for you to figure out. There's no path in science for you, because everything's already been figured out except for maybe some of the minute details. Well, that's utter nonsense, because we know only a fraction of how this universe works. Just a mere fraction of what it takes to make this universe work.
Right.
Now, that feeds to another bigger question, because people, so that part of what I like to deal with, and this is more of my hobby than my daily work type of stuff, but it's more of a hobby, is I study the science and the mathematics that people have put together and theorize how the bigger picture of the answer to everything. Okay. Well, there was back in the late 70s, 80s, a first attempt to take quantum theory, which seems to work quite well, amazingly. The mathematics and the theory of quantum theory works very well, and all the experiments that we run show that it does what mathematics says it does. So the idea was, okay, well, if we expand the mathematics of quantum theory, which is in the micro domain, subatomic area, if we expand that up and we try and take the same mathematics and apply it at a much larger level, so that maybe it will help us understand how the universe works.
Mm-hmm.
So they created something called string theory.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, string theory says everything is built from a vibrating energy of string, or string of energy. A two-dimensional vibrating string of energy. And from that, you build particles. From particles, you build matter. From the matter, you build up into planets, suns, and so forth. And the mathematics all flows. Well, obviously, it's very, very complex mathematics. And the mathematics, of course, I'm not the mathematician to really deal with that. I look at it at the bigger picture of, how well does it fit, and what happens as mathematicians continue to move forward with it. Well, one of the problems they ran into was there seemed to be multiple different solutions to the equation, which isn't right. There should only be one solution that gives us our universe. So, of course, there's a quandary, and then when there's a quandary, people begin to theorize on new approaches. Well, so eventually, a group of scientists began to theorize that maybe it's not a two-dimensional vibrational string. Maybe it's a plane. It's another dimension into that. So we're not talking about a string, but we're talking about a plane that's vibrating.
Interesting.
Well, that changes the mathematics, obviously. And it starts adding new dimensions of information that need to be accounted for. Well, in string theory, they basically had mathematically had to determine that they needed 10 dimensions of information. Of course, we know of 3, actually 4 dimensions, space and time. So these other 6 dimensions are not considered to be visible to what we do. They can be considered to be so small that we just can't access them, or we just don't see them. Well, when they decided to try and add another dimension into the base vibrational creation of a particle, it expanded out their mathematics, and they went up to 11 dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And at 11 dimensions, some other strange things started happening as they started folding out the mathematics. One of which was that it began to show that maybe, if this theory is right, we are not the only universe that exists. We are one of many universes.
Mm-hmm.
An infinite number of universes.
Mm-hmm.
So what we think as the limits of our universe being, infinity, we're wrong. We're now just mini universes, one of many universes. And these universes potentially can interact with each other. We may not see it, we may not understand how the interaction can take place, but it creates a whole new concept of what God has been able to do.
Right.
And it was from that work, and from a book written by Dr. Brian Greene, a M theorist. And
I was going to ask you next about the M theory, going from the string theory to the M theory. Yes.
M theory, right. So this new theory, which adds more dimensions in. So M theory is this unique thing, and people have called it different names. Magic for M, membrane, which makes sense because it's a dimension vibrating plane. I like magic. Magic is fun and it's interesting, but it's the complexity that it unfolds. Some people say we don't have the mathematics to solve it. That may be true. We can see pieces of it. We can't seem to comprehend the complete set complexity of the equations involved. So again, it happened it didn't happen. It occurred approximately as I was doing my reading and my research work on this, enjoying it and seeing various. It was on Science Channel and so forth, reading Brian Greene's books.
Right. You mentioned the author.
It all occurred at about the same time that my daughter convinced me I ought to do some writing.
So interesting. So this is where you took everything, right? So I'm sorry to interrupt you. Okay. Keep going.
Right. So I was looking for a subject. The subject was right in front of me. Mm-hmm. The subject was M theory. Or how do I write a science fiction book about M theory? And what it occurred to me was that M theory projects the concepts because it comes from quantum theory, and quantum theory is based upon the fact that we have vibrating strings of information that create particles, and those particles have wave functions. Okay, so there's an equation that describes electrons and neutrons, all these various subatomic particles, and they describe them in terms of wave functions. Well, if you expand that on up and you keep adding dimensions to it, you now see that everything projects a wave function. It's just a combination of a mini complex wave function, but that generates a larger wave function, if you would. So that means our bodies are basically a wave function.
Right.
Our planet is a wave function. Our star is a wave function. The galaxy is a wave function. And that means ultimately our universe has a wave function. So, being science fiction, we can do fun things. We can project, well, what if? And that's always been part of my life, is answering the question of what if.
Mm-hmm.
So the question I posed to myself was, well, what if somebody was able to tune the wave function across our galaxy or across our universe just right so that you could use communication? And therein became the basis of the story. So the name Watcher stands for a entity, an alien entity or a human who has a mental connection with the universe. Now, they may not understand that until somebody properly tunes or properly injects the right amount of energy the right way, such that it makes the connections possible.
Right.
So therefore, my stories, an alien civilization on the edge of our universe, extremely old, extremely brilliant, have figured out how to do this. And when they energize the pattern, certain beings throughout our universe connect and can talk and communicate with each other.
Kind of sounds like my world. No, sorry.
They become the watchers.
I'm sorry.
And they become the
Throw
watchers.
that in there.
So the book is all about these watchers, but it focuses a lot on Earth and what's going on Earth, and how this evolves across time and Earth. So that becomes the basis of the book, Watcher in the Fall Connection. So that was my first book. I decided I didn't want to be writing lots of different types of, unique concepts every time I turned around. So I just kept extending it. I created a second book called Conversions. As watchers continue to evolve, the pattern of watchers continue to evolve, and more beings become watchers. And then the third book, which came out, was called Evolutions, and it began to talk about how our universe is connected to other universes.
Wow.
And so there are stories that begin to connect different universes together. That's Evolution. I have a fourth one on its way called TransLink, but it's only about 60% done. So
That's incredible. That's exciting. Okay.
But go ahead.
No, please go, because after this I do have a question that all of this is so interesting. I'm so happy you're here, so please keep going.
So the key is that, yes, it's science fiction. It's it's made up stories. However, it's made up based upon kind of things that we know about and things that potentially could happen, which is kind of the basis of how science fiction evolves. So it's very interesting because there are so many of the science fiction books which really now are fiction, or not fiction, but science fact. They were done at the time when they did not understand the fact, but they projected the potential, and sure enough, eventually the potential became a reality. But it all fits into my general philosophy and pattern of understanding patterns and how patterns connect. And that means my connection to God, how those patterns connect, my patterns of how I connect with other people. I'm not a real social person, but I have certain connections that just seem to be fundamental to people. And those patterns are not easy to maintain sometimes, but they exist, and they ebb and weave. My life has gone up and down and sideways and all types of different ways because things happen to me in real life, but fundamentally the patterns continue. They may evolve and shift from person to person, but the patterns continue. And one of the greatest patterns is that God always seems to find a solution for me.
Right.
When I'm worst off. as long as I stay faithful and believe that it's going to change for the better, it seems to always change for the better.
Right.
So those are my prayers I put out there, and sure enough, they seem to come true. They don't always come true within the time frame I'm interested in, but they evolve forward to the way that makes most sense ultimately.
Isn't that interesting? That's interesting. You just said that. Makes most sense. God has a plan for everything. Sometimes we don't see it, understand it. It's not in our time. It's His perfect timing.
Right. Because, you think about it. We're just one piece in a significantly massive
puzzle. Right.
And so we're being maybe not maneuvered, but our path is such that we will end up having effects on lots of other people and lots of other things that are going to happen. And therefore, the path has to be right at the right time, in the right position for the other things that have to happen.
For the highest good of all.
Exactly. And we're just, so we're feeding into the good of everyone by following our path.
Right.
Because God's putting our path there to help other people, which we may not ever know. We may have minuscule effect or contact with, but simply because of our existence,
right,
we will have an effect on their life.
Right. It's a vibration. It's a frequency. Yeah. It's a ripple effect that goes out.
Ripple effect. Yes.
Exactly.
Just the other night I was sitting here thinking about this broadcast. One of my thoughts crossed my mind was, we are truly connected to the universe beyond anyone's comprehension. It's not that we're going to change a star. It's not that we're going to change the direction of a planet or those types of things. But you've heard of the butterfly effect.
Of course.
Where a butterfly flapping its wings in
right.
Africa creates a hurricane, which reaches across the Atlantic, and has effects on, America and Caribbean islands. And that's what's known as the butterfly effect. That butterfly effect is not just there; it's everywhere. So everything that's in motion, everything that is changing, ends up affecting everything. Everything.
Everything's connected.
Everything is connected. And it's so immense that we have no way for any individual to understand that connection.
Right.
But it's there. It is fundamental.
I love how you're putting your faith in the Most High, your faith in God, right? And facts, and your engineering, and your life journey, and science, and you're bringing it all together. It's very powerful.
Yes, but that's part of living a long life and being able to see these things happening throughout my life. Like I said, I've had
facts with faith.
Yeah,
it's kind of incredible, really.
Yeah, I've had periods in my life which have been utterly depressing, significant magnitude that I've had to fight my way out of. But I've always had faith that God would lead me to the right path. And sure enough, He has. Or God has. Let me take it back. God's not a person. God is the entity.
God is everything.
God is everything.
Everywhere, everything.
Right. But the path that I've been led down has brought me immense joy. And like I said, I've had ups and downs. I've got some downs in my life right now, but I have some ups that are driving me to potentially even higher path. So
Before we get to something that I want to ask you real quickly, you have
Okay.
your Knights Templar series of books. Please just briefly before, because I know it's almost that time, but we'll have to do another podcast as well. Can you just, how did you come to want to write those?
So again, I like to look at patterns, and I like to look at how things connect and so forth. And I always ask myself questions, and I try and figure out an answer to them. And I happen to be watching the movie Da Vinci Code.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very nice. Dan Brown's books on Da Vinci Code, and a few other books that he's written, were very, very intriguing, very nice, very fun, very exciting. But they set some fundamental questions. Now, there's been much debate over the centuries about the life of Christ. Much debate. And there are certain theories that exist out there. They have reason to be possibly kind of correct, and one of which was what Dan Brown was writing about, and that was that Christ was married to Mary Magdalene, who was a disciple of his, the only female disciple in this group, and who held a very high position in terms of being a disciple.
444 on the clock as you're saying this. I have to say that to all of us.
Right. And so there is actually certain writings and texts that seem to indicate that they were married. And that if they were married, then there was potential for a blood. Mm-hmm. She may have had a child. So Da Vinci Code was all about Leonardo da Vinci being head of a group, Freemasons, if you would, that were protecting the bloodline of Mary Magdalene during his period in time, which was the 1500s. Now, the book Da Vinci Code was taking place nowadays and was led up to the ending where the bloodline of Christ was kind of being exposed, and the actors or the people and the woman that was the central character in the story turned out to be part of the bloodline. So as I was watching that and I was thinking about various things, I thought I had written a sci-fi short story because Da Vinci had always intrigued me. But I said, what if Da Vinci had been a watcher? One of the early connections when the aliens had made early connections.
Interesting.
Maybe
You're saying
Da
this.
Vinci had received a message from these aliens, and that was part of his invention that we now know about, because he invented stuff which was far ahead of his time. So it became a short story. Well, that was fun. I mean, it was good writing. It's actually available. But then I saw Da Vinci Code, and that got me thinking, what if I take that short story and I change it? I change it to be about Da Vinci in his time actually being head of the Freemasons. Now, we have no proof of that. There's minor things about some of these secret societies that seem to hint that Da Vinci was potentially a member of a secret society. But hey, I'm a writer, I'm a science fiction, I'm a historical fiction writer. I get to take liberties. So I said, okay, let's write a book about Da Vinci during his time, protecting the bloodline of Christ as being head of a secret society, which we'll call the Freemasons, and the trials and tribulations that they go through. Now, there's been a lot of writing, a lot of tales and so forth that there was a massive treasure at the time held by a secret society Freemasonry. And that treasure has never been found. That treasure was supposedly arrived from the Knights Templar who existed before the time of the Inquisition. And that treasure that the Knights Templar amassed, which we know that they did amass a massive amount of treasure. But they amassed it in many ways. But one of the ways that people suspect is that they uncovered a treasure under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where their main headquarters existed for about 100 years. And we know that they were there. We know that there are hidden tunnels under the Temple Mount that they still do not excavate to this day. It's blocked from excavation at this time. So there is potential that they found a massive treasure. Now they were an extremely unique society. They were founded to protect travelers from Europe going to the Holy Land, because the Arabs at that time would attack any travelers. Of course, there were also thieves and everybody else that was trying to attack people that were traveling, because people that were traveling were carrying money.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was no banking system, so you couldn't just,
right.
Bring your checkbook and say you're safe. Well, because of that, the Templars actually set up a banking. They set up what is now the basis of what is now the banking. They created it. They created the concept that I'm in Italy, I want to go to Jerusalem, I don't want to be carrying money, so what do? I give money to the Knights Templar organization. They hold my money. As I am traveling, I stop at their taverns to sleep and eat along the way. They have knights that cover the trails that I'm walking and that I'm traveling,
mm-hmm.
until I get to Jerusalem. And if I need funds in Jerusalem, they will give me funds, because I will have a secret piece of written paper describing what monies I have deposited, and that paper will cover me all the way, both there and back.
It's kind of reminding me, and I know this is kind of off the wall, but it's reminding me of John Wick, where they have the coins, and you get, and they would go to the hotel, and they couldn't have any bloodshed on the grounds, but they were protected. Like, they would give the coins, and they were special coins, and they were secret.
Right. Same concept.
Okay.
But the Knights Templar created this in the years 1100 to approximately the early 1300s.
Okay.
So in doing so, they would obviously get a percentage of the money. So that created a fairly good income for them. Now, it turns out that they amassed so much money over time, they became the bankers for people like the King of France. So the King of France borrowed extreme amounts of money from the Knights Templar. Massive amounts. To the point where he could no longer pay off his debts. It was at that point in time that he convinced the Pope, who had oversight of the Templar organization, that the Templars were evil people. And the Pope was very weak at that point in time.
Spiritually weak, yeah. In the spirit. His soul.
He would cave to almost anything that had power. And so the King of France basically convinced him to destroy the Knights Templar organization And in doing so, he thought he could find their treasure, capture their treasure. It would be part of, it would get rid of his debt, and he would now own the treasure.
All over. So it sounds like greed, right? That's greed and power.
Greed.
Yeah.
Greed and power. And they organized and set and did a raid on the Knights Templar organization in France and a few other places on what is now known as Friday the 13th.
What? Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
That is where the belief of disaster happening on Friday the 13th.
Interesting. Okay.
Turns out he did not find it. He did get rid of his debt because the organization no longer existed, so he didn't owe any money.
Right.
But he did not find any treasure. So my book, Da Vinci Connection, was about that the bloodline had that treasure. That then in turn eventually triggered, I got to a point where I began to wonder, okay, where in the heck did that treasure come from? How did they get it? So there's a story. And so I wrote a book called Knights Templar, The End Times. And it talks about the Knights Templar organization and the Knights being defeated in Jerusalem, first finding the treasure and getting the treasure out of Jerusalem, then getting defeated in Jerusalem and having to escape, and only a few of the Knights escape. And they're tasked with collecting back up the treasure and hiding it from the church and the King of France.
Interesting.
Thank you. That's that, and the end of that tale is that the small group of knights who had the treasure basically meet up with the family of the bloodline of Christ and connect. And they become the protectors of the bloodline of Christ moving forward. And the treasure is now with them. So that set up the position for the book Da Vinci Connection. So it actually was written after the book Da Vinci Connections, but it was the prequel to Da Vinci Connection.
Okay.
Well, then came the question, okay, well, what happened to the treasure? Now, there's been some fun things that have gone on. Obviously, Dan Brown wrote his book about the bloodline of Christ in our time, and how that moved forward and so forth, and what happened to the casket of Mary Magdalene. Then I ran, of course, it's been out for a while, but I was watching the movie National Treasures. Well, what is National Treasures about? It's about them finding a treasure hidden by the Freemasons. So I'm thinking, I know where the treasure is because I've got it in my book. Now, how do I connect up National Treasures with Da Vinci Code? Can I connect those two? Because I got both parts. So I wrote a book called Freemason Knight Treasure, or Knights Templar Circle Complete. And basically, it tracks the movement of the treasure to eventually George Washington, Benjamin Franklin create plans to hide the treasure. And Benjamin Franklin lays out how all the clues are to be set to eventually be able to find the treasure. But it covers the portion of the treasure being moved to America and being hidden.
This is incredible.
It also connects up with family, the bloodline of Christ family, as they have to escape France because of the French Revolution at that point. And they eventually moved to Bermuda, and then from Bermuda to Scotland, where a Knights Templar, as far as we can guess, built a church which is a well-known church in that area, and how the family then, grows there, raises there, and that and what over the generations, what happens to that family, as eventually it connects up with the story of Da Vinci. So I was able to write a tale that tracks both the treasure and the family to the points where we have 2 movies or 2 books, if you would, National Treasures and Da Vinci.
Thank you.
It was a very unique set of connections, but the pattern flowed very well, and I was very happy about it.
So, with everything going on in this long journey that you've been on with science fiction, your books, your engineering, cosmology, everything that you've done, okay, where has it led you? And unwavering faith, it sounds like, which I'm so happy to hear about, in God. So where has it led you today? Do you have anything going on for you today that you want to share with anybody that you feel that you've been, through all your trials and tribulations, that you feel that you've been blessed with, that you're working on, that will inspire others?
So after all my years of engineering and all the various things I've done, for about 4 or 5 years, the question had been posed. Let me take this back a little bit. In the year 2012 time frame, roughly, I went to work for General Dynamics, and between about 2012 and about 2016, because of my background, my experience, my connections, and so forth, I became a senior system architect at General Dynamics, devising or developing a tracking system to be used on surface Navy ships for the Navy. The idea was we had ships like Aegis, what's known as Aegis ships, which are destroyers, so forth, that have massive radars and so forth. And then we have aircraft carriers, we have other large deck ships. And the problem was that the Navy had multiple different combat systems and so forth that were existing on these different ships, and they needed to cut their costs. They needed to have one unifying set of systems, so that if they made a change one place, it would enhance everything. So I was at the starting point of that as an architect, systems architect, and I was tasked with the job of devising a tracking system that would support across all the surface Navy ships, and support both naval requirements as well as missile defense. A fairly, I don't know if I want to say complex, but unusual position to put me in. I was literally tasked in front of a set of admirals from missile defense by the senior engineer for the surface Navy fleet. And she literally pointed at me and said, "He can do it." So that was my task. And for 3 to 4 years, I did that. So I was an architect, and I moved on from there to start working with the Army and some of their projects. But I was still working in architecture. My job was to pull together the concepts, the standards, the structure of how do you build certain types of systems. And that's the job of the architect. Not to design it. That's the job of the designer. But to lay out the concepts, how things come together. Okay. So over the years I did that. Eventually I retired, or kind of retired. But I started working, sorry about the shadows. I started working with the Army in terms of some research work where they were asking a fundamental question. How do you measure architecture? Well, the problem is there's nothing to measure. There's nothing physically existing. There is only concepts.
And when you are talking about architecture, can you clarify that for people? Because it's not architecture building a home, right? We're talking.
Well, it's similar in some aspects.
Okay.
So a building architect comes up with a drawing of what he wants to build. Okay? And how he kind of sees it will form up. And of course, in building architecture, you want to make it look really artistic of some style. When you're talking system architecture, you're talking about how do multiple different computers work together to solve a particular problem. And then once that's done, how does that interact with other systems that are doing other problems, but may need part of what you're doing and have to give, back, there's information flows back and forth. So it's understanding the structures and the basic concepts of how these things all have to come together to lay out a foundation for the designers to then begin to fill in the details of exactly who communicates what to whom, at what point in time, how fast. I mean, those are all the details. The architect doesn't deal with those details. He knows about them, and he's aware of them. But that's not the fundamental problem he's trying to solve. The fundamental problem he's trying to solve is, can I put certain types of things together to get answers that I need to be able to interact with other systems properly. Now, as an architect, I don't worry about, okay, I need it's going to have to be fiber optic, it's going to run, gigabits of information this fast. I know that probably will be part of the answer, but that's not what I'm worried about at this point in time. I'm worried about, can I get the necessary information to the right point at the right time, such that I can answer the overall problem. Because I'm going to, as much as I'm designing a system, I have to have that system interact with lots of other things. And so I have to make sure that everything coordinates properly. So I'm working at a much higher level. I'm working at a conceptual level, if you would. I'm not working at a design fundamental implementation. Well, the problem is, what do we have? I don't have hardware. I don't have software. I don't have, I don't have anything physical. Think of this as a mental game. The most I can do is draw a picture to show how things connect together, or I expect them to connect together. And the most I can do is kind of relate through these drawings, these pictures, how I think the quality of the system will be, and all of these other concepts that I'm worried about. So the problem was there is nothing to measure. So the question was, can you measure architecture? And the answer was, first, there's nothing to measure. Well, that was the fundamental question, and that was the first answer. Well, over time, I was tasked with coming up with a way to measure it. There were other people involved that were involved in other areas of, processes and things that the architect needed to do to make it less of an art and more of a engineering exercise. But my particular task was trying to figure out some way of making it measurable. Well, that went on for about 4 years, and then the Army basically said, look, we have enough information, we're probably just going to turn this all over to the universities, let them try and solve it from this point on. We've got about as far as we can go. So they cut me loose. So I'm sitting here and I got this question in my mind. Just can't get it out of my mind. And sure enough, meanwhile I'm going broke. Literally, I'm literally broke. But I can't allow my finances to interfere with me solving a problem which has been handed. And so I was able to find a solution. And it was not a solution that we had discussed before. It was not a solution that anybody had thought of before. But I found it because I fundamentally went back to the very basic question: what is architecture? I started from foundation. And that was always something I felt throughout my life. Whenever I run into a roadblock, whenever I run into a way that I just can't seem to answer the problem that I'm trying to solve, I go back to fundamentals.
You know what's interesting? Really quick, I'm sorry to interrupt you. What's really interesting is you worked on this for many, many years. And when they set you, when you stopped working with them, this was literally between you, your higher self, and God, the Most High. And working together with no one else around you, in your peace, your time. After all that time, you came to a solution. That is divine timing.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, there were many things there were certain things that came together to make it possible. One was artificial intelligence, which I make use of. And that was not really available up until about the time that I solved it.
Isn't that, perfect. I'm telling you.
So there were pieces that came, I pulled from pieces throughout my history, throughout my existence.
Your journey.
My journey, my mathematics, my engineering, programs and problems that I'd solved over the 50 plus years that I'd been working.
Mm-hmm.
I had to pull from all those various pieces. But then there was this one fundamental piece that came together, and I was able to finally answer the question.
And this was between you and God and the universe.
Exactly. There was nobody else involved.
Right.
There was no one else involved.
Isn't that incredible? Wow.
And it turns out that that's leading me to a new journey, which will take me to a new height. But it allows me to think back over my 50 plus years of engineering and science and pull and understand, the blessings, the creativity that's been given to me over that period of time to allow me to get to this point to solve this particular problem, which is a major problem in engineering right now.
So how are you going to utilize that? How are you going to use this blessing or utilize this to assist our planet, mankind? How are you going to use this, basically?
Well, so this particular solution will have significant impact and be able to move us forward at a much faster pace in terms of solving engineering problems and moving forward. As I look at it, for those of you that might watch sci-fi like Star Trek or Voyager or things like that, which I enjoy watching, this solution, this fundamental solution, opens up the types of things that you see happening on those science fiction shows. It begins to provide the fundamental concepts because we can now measure them in terms of concepts that we had never done before.
That's incredible.
And And in doing that, we can begin to apply new mathematics. We can begin to apply new engineering approaches. We can do a wild range of things which will move the whole capability further forward faster. It just potentially can totally shift engineering as we know it now. And as long as people understand it came because of what God's given me, and the life that He's given me, the inspirations that He's given me, and if it's used that in that tone,
Right.
we can reach the capabilities, the societies, and so forth that are projected by things like Star Trek and those types of societies that are projected here. But it really relies upon us maintaining our understanding that we're not doing this by ourselves. We're not creating these things because of who we are. We're creating these things because God has given us that ability to create.
That's correct. Amen. Yeah.
And it's, and so we have to constantly remind ourselves that God is playing His hand. He's not rolling the dice anymore. He is leading the path. He is setting the structure. He is pushing us forward. He is giving us the ability to do the things we need to do to make society, to make everything better.
Right. Positive shifts in this world, which really affects so much more than most people can even fathom or understand. Some do, and some are waking up to it. So, so this is very incredible. Is there anything else you would like to share with people? How can they find you, get in touch with you? We do have your links, and you're on YouTube. We do have your website, but anything else you want to share with people? How can they find you?
Well, again, so I have actually multiple websites. I've got my engineering website, rwtconsulting.com, rwt-consulting.com. My YouTube site, which is Ron Townsen Presents, my website, which is Ron Townsen Presents for my books and so forth, and my YouTube site, which is at The Watcher in the Fall. So they can always reach out to those. I get periodic contacts from those. They can always reach out to there. But again, the things that I am putting out there are things not just for the fun of it, but if you read them, read more than just the fact that they are fun. Read the fact that they are really showing that there are patterns that exist, that God has put in place. And we are simply tasked with, to the best of our ability, to meet those patterns and follow our path. That's all I can really tell you is a path for each and every one of you is set. God has set the path for you. And it's not an easy path. It will not be. There will be up times, there will be down times, there will be trials, there will be tribulation. But if you hold your faith and you constantly move forward, you will find that good times that God has presented for you and will lead to a better part of your life. So if you're down, if you're feeling troubled, if you feel like the world has fallen apart for you, just be aware that that's not necessarily a curse of you. It is a lesson for you. that God wants you to learn something, because you will need that as you move forward in life.
It's training. It's building those spiritual. Yeah. I like to reference, like, when people work out or go to the gym, how do we build muscle? We're tearing those muscles, right? And then we have to heal them. So same with our journey, whether it's the healing journey, spiritual journey, everything. It's painful. We have to learn something, but we can take those tools, we can take that knowledge or what we've been through. We can be a walking testimony for the Most High. We can be, you know, whatever we've gone through, we can utilize that for our future. So it's not always an attack. Sometimes it is for our development and growth. Absolutely.
Yes. Yes, totally agree.
You have been wonderful. You were such a pleasure. This was very exciting. I'm so glad you shared all of this. We're gonna have to do another one so you can share more, because you have so much knowledge. You are definitely multifaceted, multidimensional.
Yes, I have many parts to my life.
Yes, very inspiring, very knowledgeable. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful that you were able to come on today, especially for the first podcast. It was really amazing.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. All right, guys, thank you for joining us. We're gonna let you go, and just know that we're sending you love, many prayers, blessings, and always pray that you're surrounded by the Most High God's protection, love, and blessings. Bye, guys.